After 3 years of marriage to the Smith's hierarch, I faked my death and ran away. It was because I was an assassin, getting close to him to complete a mission. The usually composed hierarch didn't believe that I was dead and used the family's power to search the city like mad looking for me. A year later, I received a mission that required me to get close to that increasingly powerful man again and steal secrets. This time I decided to disguise myself, becoming his stand-in mistress. Later, in a dimly lit room, the high-ranking man kissed my face gently and eerily. His voice hoarse. "Darling, since you've come to me on your own, you can't run away anymore." When I received the call from the organization, I was sunbathing on a vacation island. "Juliet, that man is getting crazier, and the organization can't find anyone else to handle him. You need to go back. Once you finish this task, the organization will set you free." I sat cross-legged, casually sipping on my iced drink. "Boss, you said the same thing last time. This time, ever since you faked your death and left Johnson a year ago, the organization hasn't been able to get anyone close to him. I'm not going. Going back is like walking into death. Johnson loathes betrayal, and if he finds out that I faked my death and deceived him with a false identity in marriage, I won't have the freedom to enjoy life." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. "So this time, the organization has decided to give you a new identity, play the role of his wife's stand-in." I chuckled. "His wife, isn't that me? You want me to go play as myself stand-in? That's the best plan." "Not doing it, laughable, just managed to escape from the wolf's den, there's no reason to go back in." Putting on my sunglasses, I was about to hang up. The other side suddenly spoke with a serious tone. "Juliet, your good friend Caroline was captured by Johnson last time during a mission. After being so close to Johnson for so long, you must know his methods. The only person who can save her now is you. Won't you come, this despicable dog of an organization?" I was cursing when I returned to Los Angeles with my suitcase. Caroline was my best friend in the organization. The organization had her get close to Johnson. With her carefree nature and tendency to solve problems through sheer violence, she couldn't possibly match wits with that strategic wolf. When I was dealing with Johnson, I had to be cautious at all times, even careful with my pauses in speech. As our relationship progressed, I gradually became more relaxed. I sighed, rubbing my throbbing temples. I thought we'd never meet again after that last departure, but a year later, here I am, back again. As the economic center of the country, Los Angeles was bustling. Countless asphalt roads intersected and converged, pointing towards the central giant building in the city center. Under the sunlight, the towering tech building was very striking. That was the iconic building of the Smiths, the werewolf clan of Los Angeles. A year ago, I was on the top floor of that tech building, pinning down the most formidable figure of the werewolf clan, the Smiths hierarch Johnson, against the floor-to-ceiling window. The usually steady man, disheveled by my actions, with his werewolf ears exposed. "That's enough," he breathed unevenly. I lifted his chin with one hand. With the other hand, I wickedly tugged his werewolf tail. "Johnson, oh Johnson, what would your business rivals think if they saw you like this?" The sunlight shone through the window at that moment, outlining the man's smooth jawline, his sharp and handsome eyes looking at me. Unable to resist, he bit my lower lip fiercely. His voice was helpless yet indulgent. "Mrs. Smith, you're playing with me to death." Just like that, 1 year later, things had changed, and I was no longer the legitimate Mrs. Smith of the werewolf clan. As cars passed by, I sat on the roadside, eating a hot dog with a boy who looked 6 or 7 years old. I asked, "Is it delicious, delicious?" The boy nodded obediently. $8, don't forget to pay." The boy said earnestly, "I saw it was $6 just now." I smiled, "Good counting, little buddy. Did the organization send you to assist me?" The boy replied, "Turtle people are slow to grow, I'm 15 already, don't be deceived by my appearance, believe in my business ability." I pinched his chubby little cheek. "Go play, you don't know how strong the Smiths are. And when they find out, they might even turn your turtle shell into soup." The boy said, "I already have a plan," raising an eyebrow. Just as I was about to ask about his plan, his eyes suddenly turned deep green as he looked into mine. I fainted. When I woke up, I found myself tied to a cold, exquisite table. There was a noisy crowd around. 5 million once. 5 million twice. After seeing clearly, I realized that I had been sold. This little tortoise actually thought of this method, and he seemed pretty intelligent. My face was masked at the moment. I glanced towards the highest seat in the auction house. Indeed, he was there. I raised an eyebrow, adjusted my mood, and pretended to look scared and nervous. When it came to my turn in the auction, I accidentally knocked off the mask on my face. The silver mask fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. The whole place was in an uproar. Everyone attending such a high-end auction was a prominent figure in Los Angeles. No one expected that the coveted woman of this auction would resemble the deceased Mrs. Smith, the former head of the Smiths werewolf clan, so much everyone subconsciously looked towards the man seated in the high position. The atmosphere was delicate, and no one dared to place a bid. I could feel a freezing stare on me. I lowered my head, avoiding his gaze. 30 million, came the calm voice of the man in the high seat in the slightly dimmed light. Everything went smoothly. He took me back to a private villa, not our previous main residence. I breathed a sigh of relief. This meant he hadn't recognized me and didn't trust me. At that moment, the cold and elegant hand pinched my chin, the handsome man scrutinizing my face from left to right. I had to admit, seeing that handsome face again almost made me whistle. But now, I was no longer his legal Mrs. Smith. I had to play the role of a pitiable and vulnerable stand-in. Putting on an act, I squeezed out a stubborn tear and said, "Let go, you're hurting me." Unmoved, his gaze grew colder and more ominous. "You really look alike," he said. "Which hospital did you have your face done?" Biting my lip, tears in my eyes, I whimpered, "I looked like this before." "Oh." He chuckled, leaning in to sniff my scent. Werewolves often leave their unique scent on their mates as a sign of ownership. After my escape, the organization had worked hard to remove the scent Johnson had left on me. Specialists tasked with cleaning this unique scent even joked with me, "Johnson's probably marinated you by now." Herd werewolves have extraordinary stamina, even at night. This wasn't the time to reminisce. As Johnson got closer to me, smelling my scent, I lowered my head, feeling unusually nervous, unable to meet his gaze. But my chin was firmly grabbed. "Who sent you?" I knew that, as the hierarch of the Smiths, Johnson wielded immense power, and his guard would naturally not be down. Many wanted to take him down, but few could outwit him. For a man with practically no weaknesses, it seemed that only the pre-fake death me could be his Achilles heel. After my fake death, many forces sent look-alike stand-ins to approach him. They tried to imitate me in every possible way, from voice and mannerisms to daily attire and preferences. But that was too forced. For a clever and cautious businessman like Johnson, the strategy should be reversed. I looked at him confusedly, displaying a timid and weak demeanor, pretending not to remember anything and not understanding what he was saying. I pleaded, "Let me go, sir, please, I beg you." Johnson furrowed his brow, coldly stepping back. He looked down at me from above. "Let you go?" "Sure, 30 million for your freedom." I collapsed in despair, covering my face, but with a hint of a smile tugging at my lips. The first step was a success, staying by his side. Once the legitimate Mrs. Smith, I had once loved and married him with a false identity. Now, as a stand-in mistress, alluring him wouldn't be a challenge. I stayed, but the situation wasn't quite as I had imagined. While my appearance closely resembled the legitimate Mrs. Smith, my behavior and actions were notably different and attracting Johnson's attention. I expected him to keep me as his weak stand-in mistress. Instead, he had me be his little sidekick. The one who lit the flame and passed the knife. He was doing this on purpose. In the dim basement, a gunshot rang out, steady and ruthless. A bullet struck right between the eyes. The middle-aged man who was begging just moments ago now lay on the ground. It was someone sent by other factions to assassinate Johnson. Johnson calmly lowered his gun, giving me a brief glance. I quickly handed him a handkerchief, pretending to be nervous. My hands trembling as I couldn't grasp the cloth properly. The man caught the handkerchief nonchalantly and wiped his elegant hands. Although his hands weren't stained with any blood, he wiped them earnestly. Cleaning up werewolf essence was a problem the organization had to deal with after my escape. Specialists jokingly told me, "Johnson must have marinated you by now." Herd werewolves have extraordinary stamina, even at night. This wasn't the time for reminiscing. As Johnson approached, sniffing my scent, I couldn't meet his gaze, feeling unusually nervous and guilty. But my chin was firmly gripped. "Who sent you?" I knew that as the hierarch of the Smiths, Johnson wielded immense power, and he wouldn't let his guard down when it came to his family. Many factions had tried to take him down, but few succeeded. For a man with practically no weaknesses, it seemed that only the pre-fake death me was his Achilles heel. After my fake death, many factions sent look-alike stand-ins to approach him. They tried to imitate me carefully, from voice and mannerisms to daily attire and preferences. But that was too forced. For a clever and cautious businessman like Johnson, a different approach was needed. I looked at him blankly, portraying a weak and vulnerable character, pretending to have lost my memory and not understanding a word he said. I pleaded, "Can you let me go, sir? I don't know who sent me, please, let me go." Johnson frowned, then coldly stepped back. Looking down at me from his elevated position, he said, "Let you go?" "Sure, for a price of 30 million. In despair and frustration, I covered my face, but a slight smile emerged at the corner of my lips. In recent years, I have encountered a lot of dangers in order to become stronger. When it comes to handling a gun, I may not necessarily be worse than Johnson. However, my face showed fear. "How can you kill someone?" "It's against the law," Johnson sneered and eyed me for a long time. He picked up the gun and aimed at my forehead. Due to the instinct to avoid danger, I almost retaliated. But I held back. Our eyes locked for almost a minute. Johnson's gaze was always deep and calm, as if he could see through everything. I was actually a little afraid that he might notice any strange behavior from me. The other body doubles would try to look like him, but I was afraid of looking too much like him. Afraid of accidentally revealing a gesture that would give away the fact that I was his deceased wife of 3 years. And his enemy. Johnson's love was genuine, but when he turned cruel, it was also genuine. I knew better than him how he would deal with traitors. "Your eyes are really beautiful, just like hers," he said, lifting my chin to look at me. My heart raced, and I stubbornly kept my head down, not looking at him. But he suddenly grabbed my wrist, his tall body half enclosing me, not allowing me to resist. He put the gun in my hand, his large palm enveloping mine. He pressed my index finger on the trigger. Another person was shot between the eyebrows. I wanted to cover my mouth in shock, but the next moment, the scorching barrel was pressed against my waist. He nonchalantly said, "You better act more like her." Johnson had changed a lot. During the year I was away, he became even more ruthless. Or maybe he had never let me see these dark and bloody things before. I used to be the Smiths' hierarch, Mrs. Smith. The world Johnson exposed me to is all about the intricate workings of high society, flattery, and charm. He never let me see these bloody and dark things. He seemed like a perfect husband. As a family hierarch, whenever he was too busy with work and came home late, he would bring gifts to make up for it, creating little surprises for me. If I were an ordinary girl, I might have been deceived by his facade and fallen into his sweet love. But unfortunately, I was an organization killer who had experienced the warmth and coldness of human relationships, including marrying him, all with a purpose. So sometimes, I didn't believe that Johnson really loved me. People with such cautious and versatile minds don't fall in love so easily. During this time, I discreetly tried to track down my good sister Caroline's whereabouts. Meanwhile, the organization was pushing me. They wanted me to steal some information about the Smiths industry. In order to obtain this information, I worked hard to get closer to Johnson, but at the same time, I was always on edge, afraid of acting too much like her. I couldn't reveal my identity, or else I wouldn't be able to leave unscathed. But who Johnson was, he was too cautious. If it were a lover, I could have flirted a little, but now I was his assistant, working for him and paying off debts, and there were many things I couldn't touch for a while. To accelerate the progress of our relationship, I lit a fire in Johnson's house. The huge private villa was burning magnificently. To make it more realistic, I locked myself in a room. In the raging fire, despite my preparations, I was still choked by the thick smoke. If Johnson didn't come back in time, I would be burned alive. "You're taking too much risk." The organization's boy sent through the communicator couldn't believe it. I survived because I was bold. "Little turtle, you still owe me for the last hot dog money. If I really die, remember to burn it for me." "Mad woman." I laughed. Hey, if a cruel person like Johnson can fall in love, can he be considered normal? The fire grew larger and larger. I threw the communication device into the fire, watching it turn to ashes. The smoke was thick, making my eyes water continuously. The air was getting scarce. Why wasn't Johnson back yet? His car wasn't restricted today. Before completely losing consciousness due to dehydration, I curled up on the ground, and finally saw the door being kicked open from the outside. As the flames engulfed me, I blinked in great difficulty. The next moment, I felt the surrounding flames diminish. It seemed like someone lifted me up. The person felt cool, but their heartbeat was fast. Don't close your eyes. A stern command near my ear. But I was so tired, and I fell asleep. The fire wasn't small, and when I woke up from my coma, 3 days had passed. Everything went as I expected. After the fire, for the days that followed, I was around Johnson almost 24 hours a day. The villa burned down, mark it on your records. This debt isn't paid off yet. You won't have freedom in this lifetime. He said coldly. Sometimes, I feel despicable. I knew that what Johnson was most afraid of deep down was my death. Now, with someone who looked exactly like his deceased wife nearly dying in the fire, even though he didn't show it, I could feel that he had become colder and more silent. For 24 hours, he was occupied with work almost 20 hours a day. And I had to stand by diligently. There wasn't much for me to do, and many times, I just stood around. It was so boring, so I played games sneakily. Every time I did this, his icy gaze fell on me. Negligence led to a deduction in pay. This person truly bore the excellent genes of the wolf tribe, with such a keen sense of observation. But I wasn't always under Johnson's watchful eyes. As the Smiths' hierarch, in such a huge enterprise, Johnson was in meetings every day. I admired his energy and work ethic. During those moments, I simply lounged around his office, blatantly playing games. Of course, it was all a facade. If I didn't act lazy, how could I get Johnson and his subordinates to relax their vigilance? I discreetly searched his office. He was indeed cautious. The real confidential information wasn't there. I didn't find any confidential information, but I did find a photo of us together. It was taken before we got married, during the time we were still in the honeymoon phase. Johnson hadn't become the Smiths' hierarch then, he was just a bastard son taken in by the Smiths. No one believed that this person would later become the powerful leader of the Smiths. It was during that time that I got close to him. I wanted to eat cake, and he went far to get it for me. At that time, many people targeted this suddenly appearing bastard son of the Smiths, wanting him dead, and the danger around Johnson was ever present. When he came back with the cake, there was a scratch on his forehead. Blood was trickling down, but he didn't seem to feel it. He smiled at me, handed me the cake, and took out a fork. I had a little trouble on the way, so I'm late. Sorry for keeping my baby waiting. I fed him the first bite of the cake, then helped him tend to his wound. Throughout the whole time, his eyes were only on me. The photo was taken then. I never thought he kept it all these years, hidden in the most secluded cabinet, locked with 3 passwords. Johnson had been in a meeting for 4 hours. Just when I thought I was going to go hungry, the assistant brought in takeout. Johnson will still be a while, you should eat something first to fill your stomach. I looked appreciatively at his assistant. When I was still Mrs. Smith, he had just become Johnson's assistant. He was green then, but he took his work seriously. I saw potential in him back then, and over the years, he had indeed grown by Johnson's side. Johnson's office was connected to his private lounge. When Johnson was in a meeting, I would take the chance to rest there. Sometimes, being too obedient would permanently cap the relationship. Since Johnson wasn't willing to have a mistress, I had to take the initiative as the rightful owner. The meeting ended very late. I came out of the lounge and saw Johnson, looking as innocent as ever, and I greeted him. Mr. Johnson, I was very tired just now, so I went in to take a nap. I didn't lie on your bed, I just lay on the couch. My voice was soft. And it even sent chills down my own spine. He furrowed his brows. You've become quite daring in a few days. I shyly smiled and said, being around you, I've learned a lot. You said to be more like her, didn't you? You never used to sit so casually in the office waiting for you before, Mrs. Smith. The atmosphere cooled down. Facing his gaze, I continued to smile, unchanged. He casually walked up to me, pinched my chin, and sneered, then don't reveal your intentions, or else. I interrupted, it will end very tragically. He raised an eyebrow in surprise. I said, Mr. Johnson, I'm feeling a bit hungry. He replied, is that my concern? I retorted, I guessed you must be hungry too. Do you want to have a late-night snack together? He gave a cold snort, focused on his work, ignoring me. Half an hour later, I eagerly handed him a chicken leg. Here, try it out. This chicken leg is amazing, never gets boring, and aids in digestion. His gaze remained fixed on the documents in his hand, not sparing me a glance. I waved the chicken leg in front of him. You really won't eat? Fine, I'll take it away. The roast chicken was too large for me to finish alone. In the end, I shared it with his assistant outside the office. Even something as delicious as this he won't eat. Is he truly a member of the Wolf clan? This is actually his loss. The assistant sighed. Mr. Johnson has great self-control. I'm afraid only Mrs. Smith can make him lose control. Mysteriously praised for such a moment, my mood was good. We were chatting happily when suddenly someone came out of the office. Seeing the two of us with a chicken leg each, the assistant, in order to maintain a clean appearance, was eating while picking his teeth. Johnson had a cold expression. Deducting salary. Later, when I wanted to share some food with the assistant, he refused to accept it. How could I bribe others and improve relations? I could only eat these delicacies by myself. The high-intensity work was too much, and Johnson fell ill. Due to the high-intensity work and not eating properly, his stomach illness flared up. I was worried about his stomach illness. When I first met Johnson, he had a stomach illness, but it wasn't as serious as it is now. Only when I am around can he eat a few more bites of food. But now I was just a substitute. Sometimes I wanted to push him a bit, but I had to maintain a basic level of discretion. I kept cursing him for not eating properly, but I couldn't force his jaw open to feed him. This time it was serious. His stomach illness had caused a fever. Johnson was in a coma all night and couldn't be fed. The assistant was in a panic, pacing back and forth. What should we do? He went out to find a chef who could make food that Johnson would eat. Helpless, I rolled up my sleeves and went to the kitchen, preparing a bowl of black concoction and patiently feeding it to him. The man in a coma frowned and refused to eat. I had to open his mouth directly and use a spoon to feed him little by little. It took over half an hour to finish a bowl of black paste. I sighed in relief. Once during a mission trip, I also had a coma and couldn't eat. It was Caroline who concocted something and force-fed me to keep me alive. So now that I knew Caroline had been caught, no matter how dangerous it was, I had to go rescue her. In the middle of the night, Johnson, still comatose, kept holding my hand. The maid said, after Mrs. Smith passed away, Mr. Johnson couldn't sleep at night. He had to work late every night, and even when urged, he would eat. To avoid thinking about her, Mr. Johnson would recklessly harm himself to suppress his grief. If Mrs. Smith knew, she would be heartbroken. Juliet, Mr. Johnson is different towards you. I can always see glimpses of Mrs. Smith in you, but she is no longer here. We must move forward. I hope you can take care of him and help him recover sooner. The warm light shone on the blanket. I looked at Johnson's sleeping face without saying a word. You've been so attentive recently. What's your plan? The man on the sickbed, still working, and asked me. I said, repaying debts. Johnson coldly responded, you haven't repaid them all. I was kicked out of the room. The assistant looked apologetic. Mr. Johnson is still unwell. That's why he sounds harsh. Don't take it to heart. I wasn't angry, rather intrigued. Johnson had never shown anger towards me before. He did have a temper, he just kept it in check when in front of me. Now, he was more genuine. I kind of liked it. Juliet, you're really twisted. A young boy sent by the organization to assist me said over the phone. His code name was Leo. He liked tinkering with potions, and on our first meeting, he slipped me a sedative. I didn't mind. I was someone who did whatever it takes to achieve my goals. Taking care of the sick Johnson during this time, I inadvertently came into contact with some confidential information. It was some progress. I said, the organization likes people like me. Why else would they make me take the risk of doing these tasks when everyone else couldn't handle Johnson? That was indeed admirable. Oh yes, there's news about Caroline's whereabouts. I learned that while on a mission, Caroline didn't directly encounter Johnson but was captured by his men and was being held at a nightclub. The situation was urgent. Want a day off to go have fun? After a meeting, Johnson looked at the leave request I handed him, his expression unreadable. I said, taking leave is normal for work. I've been working many days, and I've been taking care of you while you were ill. If you're worried, I'll run away. You can mark my scent on me. He said, I don't mark irrelevant people. Such a venomous tongue. If it had been before, I would have reprimanded him, but now with my special status, I could only grit my teeth, curse him silently in my heart, and think of other ways. But unexpectedly, the assistant sent a black card in the evening. It was a privilege card that allowed free access to all the shopping malls owned by the Smiths. Johnson agreed to let me go out. The assistant handed me the card and was about to leave. I stopped him. "Aren't you worried that Mr. Johnson let me have the card and run away?" The assistant said, "He trusts that you won't run away." I was deeply touched. The assistant said, "After all, the Smiths people are watching all over Los Angeles. They'll be able to bring you back even if you did run." Having been suffocated by Johnson's presence for so long, I stretched my legs after coming out. I had 3 servings of takoyaki. Sometimes street food like this is even better than a fancy meal. Successfully coordinating with the organization, a stand-in continued shopping for me while I put on a hat and mask, heading down another alley to slip into the nightclub and rescue Caroline. Caroline hadn't suffered serious injuries since her appearance and physique were outstanding. She was about to be handed over to a partner of the Smiths the next day. After being rescued, Caroline hugged me excitedly. "Juliet, why did you take so long to arrive?" Another day, and I would have been in the hands of an old man. I knocked on her head lightly. "Was it not your choice to take on this mission? You should have picked missions based on pure force. You're experiencing the consequences now. Luckily you didn't really end up in Johnson's hands, or you might not even be in one piece now." Caroline pouted. "I just wanted to prove myself like you did back then. Who knew that man's men were so formidable? Thankfully, you didn't really get involved with him, or I'd have to teach him a lesson." Enough of the scolding, let's get out of here first. Once outside, I escorted her to the car. She pulled me inside. "Don't go back, you came here to save me. Johnson will find out sooner or later and won't trust you. It'll be hard for you to complete the mission. Come with me, the organization won't blame you." Caroline made a lot of sense. Leaving was indeed the best choice. Just like 3 years ago, after completing the mission, I left without hesitation. Under the protection of the organization, Johnson wouldn't be able to find me. But as I glanced back at the tallest tech building in the city center, I felt an inexplicable reluctance to leave. I was an excellent assassin of the organization. Failure wasn't an option. I stepped out of the car, struck a cool pose, and waved. "When I finish the mission, I'll come back to find you and watch male models." Returning home, the atmosphere in the mansion seemed solemn and oppressive. The maids didn't dare to speak more than necessary. The assistant informed me that it was Mrs. Smith's anniversary today. It was my anniversary. I had forgotten it myself. 3 years ago today, I had faked my death and left Johnson through a fire explosion, not even leaving a body behind. Johnson was in the study. I entered the room, keeping the lights off. The room was pitch black, with a strong smell of alcohol. Had he been drinking? Given Johnson's usual avoidance of alcohol to stay alert and rational, this was surprising. Just as I was pondering, a hand grabbed my neck in the darkness. I gasped, "Mr. Johnson?" Just when I thought he was going to strangle me, about to expose my skills, a heavy weight pressed down on me. He leaned on me completely. "Johnson?" He was actually drunk, emanating the smell of alcohol, his voice hoarse and sticky. He pressed against my neck, softly asking, "Why did you leave?" I was shocked, thinking my true identity had been discovered. Only later did I realize it was his drunken rants. I felt inexplicably distraught. Being an orphan myself, having a tough childhood without love and security, I knew how to manipulate someone like Johnson who also lacked love and security. In some ways, we were alike. I was once his only source of security, but I betrayed and deceived him. My chin was suddenly gripped tightly again. "I won't let you leave me again." I cried out, and he lifted me up horizontally. "Mr. Johnson, you're mistaking me for someone else." In the dim room, the man in power tenderly but obsessively kissed my face. His voice hoarse, "Don't leave me." That night was wild, no less than our wedding night. He once again imprinted his scent on me. The news of being marked by Johnson that night quickly spread. At a meeting, someone discreetly handed me a note, agreeing to meet at a specific location. When I arrived at the appointed place, I found someone across that I knew, a respected senior shareholder of the Smiths. He had always disapproved of Johnson, feeling his seniority and experience entitled him to take down Johnson. Despite his advanced age, his gaze remained sharp and ambitious. He looked at me. You look a lot like that woman. But living as a substitute, always in another woman's shadow, is quite pitiful, isn't it? Seeking refuge with me is a wise choice. Once the deed is done, you won't be mistreated. I smiled and said, it's a pity to follow Mr. Johnson, there are so many benefits. The old man was stunned at first, then realized something, and his face suddenly changed. Capture her. Just realized it too late, I thought as the gate behind me opened. Uncle, you're getting old, it's time to go back to your hometown and rest. Johnson answered him. How did I do this time? Pretty good. When that person indicated a union with me, I pretended to cooperate, but instead helped Johnson to get a hold of that person. This old man has a deep foundation within the Smiths. When Johnson wanted to marry me, he was the first one to oppose it, and even sent someone to assassinate me, just to make his own protege marry Johnson. After faking my death and escaping, I don't know how many lookalike stand-ins he arranged for Johnson. Now that I've taken him down, I'm feeling pretty good. It also increased Johnson's regard for me. Now, I've successfully become a stand-in as I wished. We sleep on the same bed, but he doesn't do anything to me, sleeping with his back towards me. I don't understand it. That night he marked me all over, but in the following days, he never touched me again, becoming a cold and indifferent man. We were a bit far apart, and underneath the blanket, I nudged his foot with mine. You should know you're just a stand-in, he said coldly. Then he moved over, avoiding my foot. Kind of cute for no reason, I said professionally, Mr. Johnson, I will do well as a stand-in, then continued to poke him with my foot. He gritted his teeth and endured. When did you become so obedient? I replied, you've been too generous. He inexplicably got angry. Sensing the atmosphere was off, the next night I voluntarily slept in another room. But in the middle of the night, someone brought me back. Who allowed you to sleep in another room? You did. I protested. I've never found Johnson so interesting, straightforwardly cute. I've become increasingly childish. He paused. Now? You knew me before? OMG. Why did that slip out of my mouth? I laughed. No, compared to the first time I met you. He stared at me for a long time. Johnson never dispelled his suspicions about me. I've been cautiously dealing with his tests, but he's just too cunning. He knows my preferences and knows how to test me. Making me eat something I hate, pineapple. My mouth felt sour and I got goosebumps. Johnson observed my expression. I used all my acting skills to not show anything unusual. Put this on and go out with me. I looked at the clothes in his hand and cursed inside. Such ugly clothes, this color combo, it's what I hate the most. Johnson knows how to mess with people's minds. But unfortunately, I'm a professional killer, and these things don't matter to me. Until Johnson revealed his wolf ears. I was captivated. Revealing his wolf ears was such a difficult task. I had to look away. My acting was impeccable, but it didn't end there. My good friend Caroline was suddenly brought before me. She was tied up, her mouth gagged, only able to make muffled noises, looking to me for help. Do I still have to pretend? Johnson lazily leaned on the sofa, legs crossed. You're back, but now as someone else. You thought I was childish, have you had enough fun? I widened my eyes and took a step back. Johnson had already known my real identity, and everything we've been through was just him toying with me. I underestimated him. But can he put away his wolf ears? Why does he need to shake his wolf ears while speaking? Doesn't he know how irresistible it is when he shakes his ears and looks handsome and cute at the same time? As if he didn't know, he gazed at me darkly. Mrs. Smith, you have a cold heart. Leaving me 3 years ago without a word, now that you're back, shall I give you a welcoming gift? Your friend or what you desire, pick one. He was holding the confidential documents I was supposed to find for the organization. How could someone loyal and ruthless choose a friend? Johnson then handed me a gun and said, if you kill your friend, you'll get what you want. I hesitated to pick up the gun. He half closed his eyes. What's wrong? Didn't you leave me decisively back then? Why the hesitation now? Or is it because I mean nothing to you? His voice trailed off as the gun was pointed at him. Johnson was stunned, his eyes filled with deep darkness. He chuckled, you want to kill me? The gun fell to the ground with a crisp sound. I want nothing. I dropped the gun and approached him step by step. As his bodyguards tried to stop me, Johnson raised his hand to stop them. I walked up to him, and he remained seated on the sofa, calmly looking at me. I leaned in. Can I have a kiss, honey? Upon hearing that term of endearment, his eyes stopped for a moment, then further deepened. What did you say? You want a kiss. I kissed him, and he neither pushed me away nor embraced me, just stood there, letting me do whatever I wanted to him. I could see he was lost in the moment. He truly loved me, even though I had betrayed him. Johnson's biggest refusal was betrayal. Unfortunately, I was about to betray him once again. I heard an assistant exclaiming, "Mr. Johnson." Johnson closed his eyes and nestled his head on my shoulder, falling into a deep sleep. I had used Leo's drug to induce him to sleep. This action was extremely risky unless the other person trusted me explicitly. I touched the gun on Johnson's body and shot a bullet into the ceiling. Get me a helicopter if you want Mr. Johnson alive, I instructed. I successfully flew away in the helicopter with my friend Caroline and Johnson. Once we arrived at a safe location, Caroline took the confidential information back to the organization for debriefing. Meanwhile, I took Johnson to a secluded countryside area. I used a specially concocted drug made by Leo on Johnson, which could induce temporary amnesia. Due to Johnson's powerful genes, the drug's effect would likely be reduced. Originally, it could make someone forget for 6 months, but in his case, it was only guaranteed for 3 months. 2 months later, I opened a flower shop. Johnson planted the flowers, and I was in charge of selling them. On a phone call with Caroline, she couldn't stop laughing. Quick, turn the camera towards the yard. I want to see how the once unapproachable the Smith's hierarch is gardening. Her laughter was contagious, and I quickly lowered the volume, looking out the window. Under the sunlight, the man's tall figure was diligently working in the yard, with the flowers fluttering in the wind. The typically ruthless and domineering figure had lost all its chill, bending down to plant flowers with a gentle expression. Witnessing this sight, I couldn't help but smile. Bringing Johnson here had been for my own selfish reasons. Johnson had been through a lot, and I wanted him to enjoy a carefree period where he could bask in the sun every day. It would also help in his physical recovery. He dared not eat now. I wouldn't tolerate it, making him sleep outside directly. Now, his meal times were more punctual than alarm clocks. I had to admit. The amnesiac Johnson was unbelievably obedient. Though he was nearly 30 years old, he now acted like a clingy little puppy. If I stayed away too long, he'd come clinging to me. His energy was just too abundant. Without the high-intensity work, gardening was essentially a retirement life for him. With boundless energy pent up, he would exhaust himself at night. These 2 months had been both happy and challenging. Unfortunately, the 3 months were almost up. If I stayed any longer, Johnson was likely to recover his memories. So, I had to leave before that happened. The day before I left, he handed me a rose that he had personally planted. The delicate rose was adorned with dewdrops, about to bloom, showing the care put into growing it. The two of us walked hand in hand in the wilderness, like a young couple in love, smiling at each other when the wind blew. He leaned in to kiss me. I pretended to be shy but ended up kissing him forcefully as he approached. He was obedient, letting me take the lead, but his hand on my waist was steady. This was the cozy life I had always yearned for as a child. I thought I would always be lacking love. But I never expected to meet a man like Johnson, who gave me so much security. Yet, I still had to leave him again. That night, I couldn't hold back my tears. It wasn't acting for any purpose, I was genuinely crying. Holding him close, I muttered, "What do we do?" "I don't want to leave you at all." He replied, "You can't leave, I tore up your plane ticket." "What?" I exclaimed in shock. His deep eyes held a familiar glint. It dawned on me. And I hugged his neck. "When did you regain your memory?" He smirked, patting my head. "Long ago. They say good actors abound, but Johnson surpassed them all." I couldn't even remember how many times he had fooled me. But I couldn't bring myself to leave him again. Hadn't this been the 3 months he used to keep me with him? I instinctively wanted to run, but he effortlessly hooked the back of my collar and pulled me back into his arms. Infuriated, he taunted, "Thinking of leaving me again?" I bowed my head, too frightened to look at him. "Don't be angry." "Can you let me go?" Fraudulent marriage, fake death, stealing company secrets, which one do you think would make me let you go? He gripped my waist, pulling me close. I'm not angry, but you need to give me an explanation. The aggression I was familiar with washed over me, signifying that it was the same old Johnson. I swallowed my fear and planted a kiss on his cheek. He teased, "Is that all?" Far from enough. I've fallen for you, you owe me a lifetime. A cold object slipped onto my ring finger. It was a ring that he leaned down to kiss my fingers. Marry me again, using your real identity this time. Surprised and pained, I stammered, I betrayed you, and you still want me to be your wife? Aren't you afraid I'll refuse? He raised an eyebrow, sleeping with me every day, and you still want to deny it? I shifted my gaze uneasily. This marriage must happen, but I'm finding it hard to leave this place and the flowers we've planted. Intertwining our fingers, Johnson assured me, we'll come back here when we have time. And I'll have someone take care of the flowers in the meantime. I teased, aren't you a workaholic? He kissed my forehead, I work to support my wife. Nothing is more important than my wife. After years apart, his words of endearment were as powerful as ever. I turned over, covering us both with the blanket. It's still early. Why don't we try to have a child and travel the world soon? I proposed. His eyes softened completely. That could work too. Late into the night, he held me close. His kisses were gentle and precious. Honey, don't leave me again. Let's live a good life together. The night sky sparkled, and the flowers in the courtyard swayed in the wind. Even if you miss the right person, you will eventually meet again and continue to love each other on someday.